God bless you all for coming out tonight. I just want to read to you, first of all, a scripture. And just prior to that, I just want to thank everybody tonight for not only being here, but make sure you take an opportunity to thank not only Karen Ryder, but all the people who have put in so much effort to making tonight possible. As you know, none of these things just happen. So much time and effort and preparation and finances have gone into making tonight special for you. When I got back to dry land and my mother gave me my very first Bible, I found the scripture in Psalm 69. And it says here, "Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in the miry depths where there is no foothold. I have come into the deep waters. The floods engulf me. I am worn out calling for help. My throat is parched. My eyes fail looking for my God." I just want to say to you tonight that probably lots of you may never get lost in an actual storm, but life can be a storm, can't it? And I just pray that for each of you tonight, if you've come here with a question in your heart about whether God is real and whether he loves you, I just pray that what is said tonight perhaps will just inspire you to know that even when you feel adrift and alone in your life, that God has never stopped watching you. He's never stopped looking after you. And you would actually not even be here right now were God not have his angels watching all around you and looking after you. So I'm going to take you back now on an experience to where this actually all began. It happened in March of 1989. So you know already that that was like 20 years ago. Makes me feel really old when I say that. And I was working in Japan teaching conversational English, and I saved up all this money, and my mum was working very, very hard in Sydney. She was a journalist for a Manly Daily newspaper, and I gave her a call and I said, "Mum, I want to take you on a really relaxing tropical holiday vacation. You know, you can wind down, lose all that stress," because I love my mum and I wanted to look after her. And I said to her, she goes, "I don't know if I can." I said, "Mum, I promise you, if you come with me on this holiday, it'll be a holiday you'll never, ever forget." And, well, I feel I lived up to my part of that bargain anyway. When we got to this island of Boracay, it was absolutely beautiful. I mean, it was very, very remote. They had no electricity on the island, no telephones, just thatched bungalows on the beach. But I really wanted like an adventure holiday. As you can see, just turquoise blue waters and powder fine white sand, but it was very, very remote. It was located like 950 miles south of Manila, so there was just nothing on this island. Anyway, we got there, and because there really wasn't much to do, I'd heard that there were natives around the other side of the island, and I was like, well, I wonder if they're like running around in loincloths with spears, you know, because I'd never actually seen natives, and I wanted to know if that's what they look like. So I said to Mum, "Why don't we hire a boat and we'll circumnavigate the island and go around and see them?" And so I went to the owner of the bungalows and I said to him, "Can I hire that catamaran that you've got there?" And he looked at Mum and I and he went, "No, I think you ladies couldn't handle that." I think he could see his brand new shiny catamaran just disappearing into the ocean. He said, "How about this? I can hire you this." I don't know why I agreed to hire a 7-foot canoe. In the Philippines they call it a bunker, and it has it was so narrow you couldn't actually sit inside it. They placed a plank of wood across the top as a bench and we sat on top of that, so that's how narrow it was. It had 2 outriggers on the side and they gave us a couple of oars. And I don't know, when you're 22, you're just not thinking as sharply as you do when you have the wisdom of experience, because I should have noticed the white plastic bucket in the bottom of the canoe as a sign that something would go wrong, but I didn't, and actually neither did Mum, so I don't know what her excuse was. But anyway, so off we went, and we were having a great time, or at least I was. And yeah, the boat actually did have a leak, which is why the bucket was in there, but nothing too much. We were just having to sort of intermittently bail water. But my mum said, "Michelle, I'm really not enjoying this." You know, she's not like a water person at all. And she says, "I want you to take me back to shore." And I'm saying, "Mum, please, you're just spoiling the whole trip." And then this huge manta ray swam right underneath the boat. And she was like, "Okay, that's it, Michelle, I really have had enough. I want you to take me back to shore." And so I thought, oh, she's just going to whinge all day, so I'll drop her back. And so I dropped her back off to shore, and her very last words to me were, "Please, Michelle, don't go out too far." For any of you under 40, listen to your mother. She really does know best. But I didn't listen to my mother, and I was off. I was having a great time, actually. I was paddling away. It was wonderful. But as you can see from the island, while I stayed in the tranquil waters of the lagoon, it was really perfectly safe. But the moment I tried to round the point to get around the other side of the island, all the ocean currents from behind the island just very quickly swept me out to sea. And I found within an incredibly short space of time, I was in trouble. I just could not get back to shore. I paddled and paddled furiously to try and get back. And I realised the very scary thing is I'm one of those people that loves to look at maps and things like that. And I knew from looking at the map that there was no islands in between, as you can see from the next picture. Once there's the island of Boracay, you just keep on going. And there was like about 1,000-kilometre stretch of open ocean between that island and the coast of Malaysia. And I knew that if I did not leave that boat and swim back to shore, that I was most assuredly going to spend the night at sea. So at 4:45, I put on my mask, snorkel and flippers, and I hopped onto the outrigger of the canoe, and I prepared to swim. But before I could, this very loud, audible voice called out to me and said, "Don't leave the boat." I can't even begin to tell you how relieved I was. I was like, thank God my friend John is coming in his launch to rescue me. And so I turned around, and in every single direction there was nobody there. Now, I knew I wasn't hallucinating. I'd only been out there 5 hours. But I definitely heard this voice. And then I thought, no, I have to leave the boat, because if I stay in the boat, I'm dead for sure. So again, I hopped back onto the outrigger of the canoe and prepared to jump. And again, this voice that was so authoritative just boomed this command at me and said, "Don't leave the boat." I got such a fright, I actually fell face first into the water. And when I crawled back into the canoe, I was actually more afraid of what this voice might do to me if I disobeyed than actually the thought of spending that night at sea. But then I had never ever spent a night at sea. As I moved into deeper water, it was just incredible how big the waves got. I just couldn't look at them in the end. They were so big. I just looked and they were like these mountainous walls of water just coming towards me and crashing into the canoe. All I could do was hold on for dear life to this white plastic bucket and keep bailing water all night, terrified that it would sink. I didn't think the night could get worse, but then suddenly I heard this enormous just clap of thunder. You know when you're outside and you hear thunder, it's so loud. And sheet lightning lit up the whole sky, and I realised I was caught in the midst of a tropical storm. Anyway, that night was so just unbelievably frightening. But amazingly, I actually made it through that storm. I made it through that night. But the next day I looked and I could see the sun coming up in the sky, and suddenly, you know how just before you're about to have like a car accident, everything goes into slow motion? I looked at this enormous wave coming towards me. I thought, this is it, this is the one. And it hit the boat with such force, it just flung me out. And I just felt myself going down under the depths, and I knew that I was drowning. It's the most terrifying feeling to drown. You just cannot work out which way is up. And I finally got to the surface of the water, and I swam back to the canoe. And I didn't know then, and sometimes it's really good to not know the future, I didn't know then that I would spend the next 2 days holding onto the side of that upturned canoe, just waiting to be rescued. I did everything I could to flip that craft over, but I think because of the outriggers that had vacuum sealed itself to the ocean, and no matter what I did, I could not flip that craft over. Suddenly, there was like an air bubble that just popped, and all my belongings started coming out from underneath the bunker. And I never forget, actually, probably wouldn't remember. Do you remember those yellow or white Sony Walkmans? You know, they were quite big plastic ones. Yeah, well, I'll never forget watching my Sony Walkman just bob along the waves. It was just quite funny to watch it, actually. I was like, They never said that would float in the instruction manual, but off it went. And then suddenly I saw my water bottle. I had a sports bottle of water just like that, and it was bobbing along the waves, and I automatically knew I have to get that water. And I went to swim to grab the water, and again I heard this voice. And this voice called out to me and said, grab the flippers. And I'm like, flippers? Why am I going to need flippers at this point? I know it's not like I'm going to suddenly do any snorkeling. So again, in my own rational sense, I went to swim to grab the water. And again, this voice just said to me, grab the flippers. And so I swam, and it was so difficult to try and put these flippers on. Can you imagine in the middle of the ocean with a storm and try and get these flippers on? And I have to tell you, for the next 2 days, as I literally died of dehydration, when they found me, I was so close to death. My whole throat was so constricted. My tongue was this thick hanging out of my mouth. I had second-degree burns. And that whole time I kept thinking, why did I grab these stupid flippers? But if you take away nothing else from tonight, remember this. God knows the future and you don't. And sometimes he is asking you to trust beyond what your eyes can see, beyond what is rational. That's why it's called faith. 2 days later, and I'll tell you later how it happened, if I had not grabbed those flippers like God had instructed me to and had grabbed the water, I would not be standing here telling you about this today. So sometimes you have to just follow what God says. That day I waited and waited and waited, and all I could do was, with one arm wrapped around the remaining outrigger, just hang on and wait to be rescued. And I was so sure that my mum was coming to rescue me. You know, I don't think there's a crisis that you ever face that you don't expect your mum and dad are coming to rescue you. You always expect they're coming to get you. And I couldn't believe it, as hour upon hour passed, my mum just didn't come. I just kept looking up into the sky expecting I'm going to see a plane or a helicopter. I kept looking across the ocean expecting there'd be a boat coming towards me with search and rescue written on it. And my mum saying, don't worry, Michelle, it's over now. And you know, it just never, ever came. It's probably why I did get such bad burns on my faces. I just spent that whole day looking up into the sky expecting she'd come. And as the sun began to go down in the sky on the second night, I cannot ever describe to you the terror that I felt, because I knew I'd made it through one night, but how was I going to make it through a second night? And as that sun went down, I was so scared to be back in that dark again. And I kept thinking, Mum, why haven't you come to get me? And then I looked down and I saw I still had the money belt wrapped around my waist. When we decided to go out for the day, I said to Mum, I don't leave all our belongings like in the bungalow. That's a bit dangerous. So we put both our passports, all our traveller's checks and all our cash into this money belt. But I forgot to give it back to her when she got off the boat. I had left my mother in a third world country on an island with no communication, with not one single solitary cent. And I can tell you that, you know how they say American Express, don't leave home without it? It does not help you in the South China Sea. I had everything and I could not use it. I mean, money will not save your life. And sometimes when you have to really confront that, you realise that is the truth. So suddenly I realised my mum wasn't coming to rescue me. And my own tenacity and strong will and self-determination had probably saved me this far, so I thought. But I realised I couldn't save my own life. And it was at that point I realised I'm probably going to die tonight. And you know, the scary thing wasn't that I was going to die, was that I didn't know where I was going to go next. And I suddenly thought, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what's going to happen after this. And I suddenly thought about it, heaven or hell, up or down. I knew I had a destination, I had a decision, and I had a choice, as do each and every one of you. Well, as for me, I wanted to go up. I said, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to go up. You know, I'm living witness to the fact that not a single word of God returns void, because my mother is Jewish, and obviously all our family is Jewish, except that my mother married out of her faith and married a Catholic. And so, talk about being confused. But But my dad sent me to a Sunday school when I was very young, and I didn't attend that many times because he travelled around a lot with his job. But you know something, as I sat there thinking, what can I remember about God? Is there anything I can remember? Of all things, a scripture popped into my mind from way back when I was 7, and the scripture was, nobody shall enter this kingdom of heaven but through me. And I knew the me in that scripture, that was Jesus. And then suddenly something else came back to me. When my mum had met me in Singapore, she just, I don't know, she was just really, really glowing, and I wasn't expecting it because she was meant to be totally stressed, you know, that's why I was paying for this all expenses paid holiday. And I said to her, Mum, what's going on with you, you know? And she wouldn't say, and I said, I know, you've met a man, haven't you? Because she was single. And she said, well, yeah, but not the kind of man that you think. And I thought, well, how many other kind of men are there? And she said, Michelle, I've come to know Jesus as my Messiah. And I was like, oh, Mum, you're Jewish, that's not possible. And she's like, well, Michelle, I have, and I found out that he is the one. And I said, well, can you just not tell anybody we know that you believe that? Because I mean, like, I'm really going to feel like a pork chop in a synagogue every time we go there if you're going to be mentioning Jesus. And she goes, no, look, I'm not going to say anything, but I have to tell you this one thing, Michelle. And I said, Mum, I really don't want to hear it. And I didn't want to be preached to. I didn't want to be lectured. I wanted to go on a fun holiday. I didn't want to be with somebody who's going to talk non-stop about Jesus. And she said, just let me say one thing. I said, okay. She said, perhaps one day God may have to bring you right down on your knees. And she said, as a mother, I pray that never happens to you. She said, but if it does, just remember, his hand is always outstretched to you, and he's just waiting for you to cry out to him for help and say, God, I need you, save me. She said, and I promise you he will. I said, okay, Mum, I'll keep that in mind. 4 days later, I was in the ocean, and in the very predicament she warned me I'd be in. So far down on my knees, trust me when I tell you, there was nowhere else to look but up. And so I thought, okay, the Catholic Church says that it's Jesus, and my mum says it's Jesus. And so I looked up in the sky and said, I don't know you, Jesus, but if I die in the next couple of minutes, and that was a very real possibility, please take me to heaven to be with you. And I believe it was in that moment, just a very simple prayer, that I believed he was the Son of God, that I was both physically and spiritually saved. And somebody told me, you've just had the longest water baptism in history, and who knows, maybe that's also true. But you know, God is a good God, and he proved to me that he is everywhere. He came to the middle of the South China Sea to rescue me. He can come right here and rescue you and meet you at your point of need. Now, I know this is going to sound very presumptuous because, well, it's just going to sound very presumptuous, but I had a question for God. I wanted to know, was I going to die? Because, I mean, I wasn't prepared. It was hard work out there. I wasn't like in a big inflatable raft with a minibar. You know, I was hanging onto the side of a piece of wood. Every moment was a battle for survival. I didn't want to keep fighting to survive and find out a couple of days later, well, actually, you were going to die anyway. You know, I mean, how frustrating would that be? So I looked up into the sky and I said, can you tell me, am I going to die? And of course, I didn't actually expect somebody would answer me. I was just asking a question. But this audible voice that was so powerful said to me, you are not going to die. I was so amazed that I said, could you say that again? Well, I wanted to be sure that I'd got it right. And again, God spoke to me audibly and said, you are not going to die. I was so excited. I was like, I'm not going to die. I'm not going to die. And then I got skeptical again. It's amazing how quickly it can happen, actually. I'm like, oh, hang on a second. This is a huge deal. You know, I thought to myself, there's no such thing as a free lunch, probably not even with God either. And I was thinking, well, what do you want in return for this gift of life? Because surely there's something, right? And I suddenly got a visual picture of the nunnery. I thought, he's going to ask me to become a nun. That's the most dramatic thing I could think of. But it just shows how we just don't know God. And Well, at that point I was quite prepared to be a nun, and after having children it was like, pick me, please, send the peace, the solitude. But I just looked up into the sky again. I said, but what do you want in return for this gift of life? And he said to me something I didn't understand. He said, I want 100% of your faith in me. I really didn't understand that concept, but I was so afraid that I was going to drown out there that I quickly said, okay, you have 100% of my faith. Don't trifle with God. I found that out. Do not mess around with the living God. Because he said to me in a voice very filled with, well, it seemed to me like frustration. He said, not 90. I said to you, 100% faith. I was like, how can I find this faith? How can I find it? And so I said, help me. And in the moment that I called out for him to help me, I just felt this incredible surge go through me. And I was able to look up into the sky and say, look, I don't honestly know how you're going to do it. I don't see any islands around. I have no idea how you're going to rescue me. I was like, well, maybe he's going to send a big bird down from the sky to pluck me from the water and put me on dry land or something. I really didn't know. But I said, I believe that you will save me. And you know, I absolutely, even though the chance of me surviving was impossible, I believed with 100% faith that God would save me. And I believe that that was a gift and a measure of faith that he gave to me. And it wasn't just for me. Each one of you is given a measure of faith, and each one of you can increase that faith. And I believe he's not just asking 100% faith from me, he's asking 100% faith from you also. Because you'll probably, well, hopefully you're not silly enough to hire a 7-foot canoe in the Philippines, are you, and get lost at sea. Only I would do something like that. But I can tell you from my own experience, I've had more storms here on dry land than I ever did out in that ocean. You know, I have been through some really difficult situations. I married a non-Christian man. When my son was 2, he was diagnosed with severe autism. And I just struggle to tell you how terribly difficult that was. And I just went through years of just difficulty and depression and just really a lot of financial difficulty. And then my daughter suffered as a result of that. But the one thing I can say is that God doesn't always do instantaneous miracles. But if you stay faithful, God will restore everything to you. Because my son now is 15 and completely restored. He is a walking, talking miracle. In fact, he just went and gave a speech at the school about his own testimony, and nobody would even ever imagine that he'd ever had severe autism. So I want to encourage each one of you today, don't give up on God just because your answer or your miracle is not given to you instantly. God is a God who rewards the faithful. Okay? And just know that God cares about you. So even though I had been through all of that, I can tell you that you just need to give God not 90, but 100% faith. And he will give you the desires of your heart. It's very hard to describe, but imagine that the hull of the boat is upturned and I've got my back pushed as hard as I can against the upturned hull and my flippered feet pushed in a polar opposite just so my legs don't have to be dangling in the ocean. And suddenly, because it was so incredibly dark out there, just pitch black, suddenly the whole ocean began to fill with light. And I looked up, and what I saw was both amazing but incredibly terrifying. I looked up and saw 3 enormous beings standing on the ocean in front of me. I just remember I put my head down and said, please, when I look up, can they just no longer be there? But every time I looked up, they were still very much there. The light that shone from them was something that I've never seen on this earth. It was the most incredible white opalescent light, and it covered the entire water. And the strange thing to me about them was they stood together like soldiers on the water, shoulder to shoulder. And I kept thinking they looked like they were in a mould. The three were one and the one were three. And it didn't really make any sense. And then suddenly I felt something very heavy leaning on my back. And the air about me was filled with this incredible electricity. It was shaking and vibrating. I reached my hand out to touch the air and I got zapped. Like my hands went zzz. And I suddenly looked down and I saw the wings of an angel had completely enfolded me like that. The fear was just immense. I just sat there terrified, just thinking, what's happening? I don't know what's happening. But after a while, I opened my eyes and I have to tell you that it was so incredibly beautiful. I mean, when the Bible says the eyes have not seen, nor the ears heard of what God has waiting for those that love him, that the wings of this angel were so perfect. It was like, hard to describe, but like the wings of an enormous dragonfly. It was solid and yet I could see right through them, and every single beam in them was perfectly illuminated with brilliant white light, but had all the colour running through it. You know, like when you pour petrol and you see all the colour. It was like each beam was perfectly coloured. It was absolutely amazing. Then those three beings disappeared and the light diffused from the wings of this angel, and I was yet again in darkness. And that night had its own set of problems. I'd be picked up by waves and just thrown into the ocean. I would completely lose contact with the boat. Can you even begin to imagine what that was like? I was just doggy paddling around in the middle of the South China Sea, not knowing what was going to happen next. Do you know that every time that night, either that boat contacted with me or I banged into it? And that is absolutely not possible scientifically, but it happened. But what was more amazing than that was that all night that angel held me in its wings. And I want to tell you that, as I said, I am not special. God has angels everywhere, surrounding you, upholding you, and keeping you safe. So when you feel in your own life that you're lost and alone and in the dark and where is God, know that God has angels surrounding each one of you and upholding you and keeping you safe. God said, I'll be your fortress, your strength, and your deliverer. And know that he is indeed all those things. The next day, I finally saw land just very, very far away, just 4 very, very small islands. And I was pretty excited about it, actually. I thought, okay, well, this is obviously what God's got planned. I'm going to, go on these islands. And I'd already in my own mind built the entire Robinson Crusoe chalet, and I kind of imagined being rescued by 60 Minutes and 5 years running around with these natives. And but that was not necessarily to be. As I was making my way towards these islands, I was about 5 kilometres away. I'd almost made it. And suddenly I saw fins on the water. And I didn't know it at the time. I wouldn't find that out till later, but I was actually bleeding into the ocean. And obviously they were attracted to that. And I kept looking at the fins, just hoping they'd jump out of the water. I was waiting for them to be dolphins. Actually, I was really praying that they were going to be dolphins, but they weren't. These 2 sharks were coming straight for me, and they had the slicing fins of sharks, and I knew that they were sharks. All I could do was I quickly threw myself onto the hull of the upturned boat. And if you can imagine, it only had one remaining outrigger to hold on to. And it was kind of covered in this like algae, this sort of slimy green algae. And so when I lay on it, on my stomach, I only had one remaining outrigger to hold on to. The waves from behind me just swept me like a torpedo straight into the path of these sharks. So like not only were they coming towards me, but I was like making a beeline towards them. And all I could do was just turn around, and I kept saying to myself, Michelle, don't splash, don't splash, don't splash. And I was just trying to very carefully swim back to the bunker. And I expected any moment to feel the serrated teeth of the jaws of one of those sharks just clamp onto the back of my leg, when I suddenly heard this voice. And this voice again audibly called out to me and said, "Fear not, they will not hurt you." And I'm like, you can't be serious. There's sharks coming towards me. I'm dead. And again, this voice, I don't know why God had to say everything to me twice. That's a worry. Again, he said to me, "Fear not, they will not hurt you." And then he said to me, a very difficult challenge, said, "Now where's that 100% faith you promised me?" And I'm like, how can I have 100% faith? There's sharks coming towards me. But I had like 10 seconds to make a decision. And so again, I just called out and said, help me. And again, this like supernatural electricity flowed into my body, and I knew that they were not going to attack me. And the most amazing miracle happened before my very eyes. The moment I said, I have faith, those sharks just stopped coming straight towards me, turned, swiveled, and swam away in the totally opposite direction, as if they had never seen me at all. And I was astounded by this God. You've got to remember, I had never read a Bible. I didn't know God. I didn't know he could do this kind of stuff. But I was amazed. And again, you're probably not going to get lost at sea. You're probably not going to be in a storm. You're probably not going to get attacked by literal sharks. But I want to ask you this question. How often do you feel in your life that you're surrounded on every side by hungry human sharks? You know the kind I mean, don't you? Yeah, the ones that want to assassinate your character. The ones that want to just destroy your confidence. The ones that are always putting you down at work. The ones that even who you think are your friends gossip about you. Those hungry human sharks, sometimes they even live in the same house as you. God would say the same thing to you that he said to me. Fear not, they will not hurt you. I'm not saying they won't try. That's their assignment. That's their job, is to destroy. But greater is Jesus in you than he that is in the world. And he's saying to you today, do not fear these hungry human sharks, because he is stronger. He will protect you. Okay, so I want you to remember that next time you feel you're being attacked, is you need to say, I have Jesus in me who is stronger than any hungry human shark. Okay? Shortly after this, I saw this enormous fishing vessel coming towards me, and I was like, okay, so this is how I'm going to be rescued. You know, I kept preempting God, and it was coming closer and closer and closer, and I had this little tank top on, and I took it off, and I was swinging it like a lasso, and I looked everywhere for the people. It was like, where are the people? There was just nobody on board. It was like they, I don't know, put the boat on autopilot or something. There was just nobody there. As the boat went past me, I tried to call out, help, help, but I had no voice left. And I had to watch my rescue boat just keep on going. But by now I had learned to exercise this 100% faith. So I just kept looking at the bow of this boat and saying, God, please let somebody come and see me. Please send somebody to see me. And I just kept praying and praying and praying, and they were about a half a mile past me, and I kind of thought, okay, so that's not going to happen then maybe. And then just when I'd given up, and that's why I encourage you, don't be like me. Don't give up, because just when you're sometimes about to give up, your victory happens. I suddenly looked back up, and there was a figure standing on the back of the boat, pointing directly at me into the water, and they waved. It was I'm in the middle of the South China Sea, and people are waving to me. And so I waved back, and then he waved again. I'm like, yeah, okay, I see you. And then suddenly all of his other friends came onto the back of the boat, and they're all waving like they're expecting to see me there. And see, this is how I now know that God is so real. I asked him later, why did you do that? He was a Christian. He said he was down in the bows of the boat scrubbing and cleaning, and God spoke to him and said, go up onto the back of the boat and look into the ocean. He could have said, I'm busy. He could have said, what for? Obedience. Anyway, all his friends suddenly started going, you come. And I'm like, well, couldn't you come to me? I mean, I'm the one that's been in the ocean for 3 days, and these people don't want to come and get me. Anyway, they continued to beckon, I continued to beckon, and I realised these people were not coming. So I had to now leave this tiny little canoe, which was like my lifeline, and swim through waters where I'd just seen sharks to get to that rescue boat. And I went to swim, and I realised I couldn't. It was like 3 days of struggling, of paddling, of bailing water. My arms had no strength, and every time I went to swim, I just started to go under and drown. And then God showed me what to do. He said, and this was in my mind, not audibly, he said, lie on your back and use your flippered feet to propel you. And because I put those flippers on 2 days earlier, I was able to propel myself the entire kilometre to that canoe. And see, God knew when he told me 2 days prior to grab those flippers that I would need them. I finally got there and they threw this huge rope down the side of the boat and they said to me, you climb up. What do these people think I'm like Tarzan's wife or something? You know, I've just swum all the way here, now I've got to scale this boat. I'm like, these people are really unhelpful. But anyway, thought I'd tell them that once I got on board. Anyway, so all I could do was hold on to this rope as they dragged me up over the side, and all the rusty steel fragments just ripped straight down my second-degree burns, and I thought, oh, I'm going to let go. And I just knew that if I did, I would never grab hold of that rope again. I finally got onto the deck of the boat and I was doing some serious swaying. I was like, okay, I just got to collapse. I'm going to collapse. And then suddenly this boy called out the silliest thing. He looked at me and he said, Serena, it's an Americano mermaid. I thought, a mermaid? But then I looked down at myself and I'm the one in a bikini with just these flippers and I've got long blonde hair and they pulled me out of the middle of the ocean. You know, they actually really believed I was a mermaid. They said it was not until they took off my money belt and pulled out my Australian passport did they really believe I was human. They're actually quite superstitious in the Philippines. There was this lovely boy, he was so sweet, this boy called Nelson Zarita, and I said to him, I looked at him and I said, thank you so much for saving my life. Do you realise that you saved my life? And he turned to me and said, it wasn't me that saved your life. Don't you realise it was God? And I was like, you're right. It was never you. It was never me. But it was through grace, by faith that I was saved, and that not of myself. Indeed, it was a gift from God. I'm just going to very quickly tell you what happened to my poor mother. Oh, I still feel guilty about that. No, I really do. Even when I was driving today, I thought what I've put that poor woman through. As you know, so she was on the island. She could not get rescue. She couldn't get anybody to help me. But finally, this man called David Lonergan said, here, take I've got the $1,200, because they wouldn't rent her a plane without cash first. And so he gave her the $1,200 and she got the plane, and she was so sure that once she got that plane, she would find me. But it's like looking for a needle in a haystack out there. And she had to come back to the island, and everybody told her she can't possibly be alive. You know, she's been gone 3 days in shark and pirate infested ocean. And so she went. They had a little church on the island, and of course she'd been furious with God. She said she stormed up and down that beach saying to God, just 3 months ago, I gave you my life and I entrusted all my children's lives into your hands, and what, 3 months later you've stolen one of my children away from me? She was really battled with God, and she sat down in this little church, and somebody on the island lent her a Bible. And she saw a vision of Abraham walking up Mount Moriah with Isaac, and she heard God saying to her, surrender, surrender. And she said it was the hardest thing that she'd ever done. But she said, okay, God, I don't know why you're doing this to me, but I give you my child. And at that very time, he said to her, Rochelle, you only have a piece of this puzzle. I have the whole plan. Trust me. She didn't actually believe I was alive, but she believed that maybe out in the ocean I had given my life to Jesus and I'd gone to heaven to be with him. At that point, she had her Bible in her hand, and God said to her, in her spirit, not aloud, open it. And it fell on Psalm 46 that says, God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved, and God will help her just at the break of dawn. She then gathered up all our stuff and went back to Manila, and she was picked up by the Australian Embassy officials. And at this time, it had taken me 24 hours to actually get back to Manila, because as it would happen, because of the storm, their radio was actually broken, and they couldn't even radio ahead and tell anybody I was alive. So by this stage, it was 4 days that I'd been missing. And so my mum arrived back in Manila on the same day that I did, me coming from the ocean and her coming from Boracay Island. And I got there and I said, look, all I need to do is just call my mum. I don't care about anything else. Please let me just call my mum. And so they gave me the number for the Australian Embassy and I placed a call, but because it was a Sunday, they were closed. And so I just left a message on the answering machine saying, can somebody get a message please to my mum? She's in Willie's Bungalows number 4, that her daughter Michelle, Mum, I'm not dead, I'm alive. And she'd arrived in Manila at exactly the same time, approximately. And the Australian Embassy officials picked her up and took her to their home. And he said to her, I mean, he had to be honest, he said, look, quite a few people don't understand the currents in the Philippines and, you know, people do get lost out at sea. And if your daughter is found, like, do you want us to send her back to you in Australia or do you want us to bury her here in the Philippines? And she said she couldn't believe he was asking her that question. And she said she just couldn't answer it because suddenly her daughter had become a body to be zipped up in a bag and sent back to Australia. She said, but she never ever had to answer that question because suddenly the phone rang. And he said, oh, excuse me for a moment, I've just got to go and answer that. And she said he came flying down the stairs just 3 at a time saying, you're not going to believe it. This is not possible. But your daughter Michelle, she's not dead. She's alive. And get this for amazing. He said, I can take you to her now because they'd put me in a hotel room just 1 street away. So I had been lost for 4 days out in the middle of the South China Sea and I had come back to my mother just 1 street away. That is the goodness of God. And I want to say that that same God that rescued me in the South China Sea and has since rescued me so many times back on dry land from, and I have to tell you, you know the most beautiful thing that I discovered about Jesus, the absolutely most beautiful thing of all, is that even when I was in my deepest, darkest depression over my son and my divorce, and I stopped having 100% faith in God, you know the most beautiful thing is he never stopped having 100% faith in me. He will finish the good work that he started with you. He is the author and finisher of your faith. And even if you've let go of his hand, he will never let go of yours. If you just close your eyes and just bow your heads for a moment, I believe that God is speaking to a number of you tonight and saying to you that it's time to surrender. It's time to surrender those loved ones in your life. They are God's children before they are your children. They are on loan to you, a gift from God. And God is saying surrender. Surrender your partners who have not come to know the Lord. Surrender your parents. Surrender your jobs. Surrender your belongings. Surrender. God is still on the throne and he is in control. And his hand is outstretched and he's saying, trust me, I won't let you down. People may let you down, the world may let you down, but God won't let you down. And for any of you here who perhaps like me at the time did not know Jesus, he said that if you would believe in him and that you would believe that he died and gave his life for you, that he would go ahead and write your name in the book of life. I just want to very quickly tell you about a vision I had in Singapore 2 months ago. I had this vision where I was with Jesus and he took me and I was in heaven and he took me down to these gates. And I was so happy to be in heaven, but I saw all these people on the other side of the gate. And they were all crying and shaking the gate and begging for me to open the door and let them in. And I said, God, please let these people in. They want to come in. Can't you let these people in? Please. Why won't you let them in? And God said, because they wouldn't accept my son. And I'm saying to you tonight, and that vision terrified me and made me think that I'll never stop saying to people that Jesus is asking you to accept him now while you still have a chance. His hand is outstretched to you. He's a merciful God. And if you would believe in him, you will have eternal life.